And now a word from visiting artist Kanae Holder, me. According to Annie, yes, according to Annie, she said, hold on to your seats. This conference will be a way of fully codifying the unsaid yet pervasive dichotomies of the Hudson River Valley landscape. Through ritualistic cathartic purging, utilizing various forms and mediums, including voice, movement, music, video, rant, etc. Cathartic purging, utilizing various forms and mediums, including voice, movement, music, video, rant, as I've done a lot, etc. Event attendees will conjure up a new reality for the Hudson. Once these ideas are released, like dandelion seeds, they will spread and put all green pastures, both literally and figuratively, under attack. Although to some, this upheaval will be like asbestos removal, messy, unnecessary, and potentially dangerous. To us, the dredging up of demons is like chemotherapy. The cancer is colonialism, privilege, and unexamined and unnaturally naturalized whiteness. By re-inviting back those who were exterminated Native Americans, or exploited descendants of slaves, and other marginalized populations, migrant workers, we will be doing our part to repastoralize the pastoral. To repastoralize the pastoral. As Fanon says, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. We will not betray, but bestow a new reality among the hearts and minds that share this beautiful landscape.
Because I think the whole point of the pastoral aesthetic, if we juxtapose the pastoral aesthetic with other kinds of aesthetics, it's incredibly, it's all about like sort of this kind of, from the very beginning. It starts in ancient Greece with Theocritus,
right.
But Theocritus is not classical. Theocritus is part of what's called late antiquity. So he's already writing. He's actually writing. What's interesting is the Greek pastoral starts in Egypt, in Alexandria, in the Ptolemaic court, which was urban. So it's almost like writing nature poetry in Chelsea,
right.
Because like Donald Trump is paying you to.
Right.
So this guy Theocritus is writing this nostalgic poetry, not just about the Greek countryside, but also about these vanished heroes from this classical age. But it's highly literary, so the only people who can even understand it are the elite. It's not, it talks about shepherds, but no shepherd could actually read it. From the very beginning, it's about these paradoxes and these kinds of estrangement and a self-fictionalizing sort of stance.
What a wonderful world. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue, clouds of white, bright blessed days, dark sacred nights. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of a rainbow, so pretty in the sky, and are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry. I watch them grow. I learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the faces, so pretty in the sky, are there on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry. I watch them grow. You're no more than they're ever going to know. I know a whole lot more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yeah. I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
I think focusing on our campus is a place in which we can think about the degree to which our participation, and by our I mean a very specific question for each individual based on their racial identity and sexuality, class status, etc., can engage in an actual process of trying to renegotiate the reality of this campus. I personally feel like, to some extent, any real change that I know that I can put into a project of creating some kind of change or difference or rupture or what have you is immediately foreclosed, I feel like, in my participation already coming from an upper middle class white family from the north. And I think maybe that's not a problem. Maybe the project for me is to, and for other white students, is to listen. And I feel like there's just so many instances in my observations where there's just a massive, omnipotent sense of obliviousness, where I think I am engaging in something really radical or something like really intense and powerful, when you're not, and you're not listening. And if you don't listen, then you're potentially doing more damage and more harm than you are, letting the real work be done. So.
I like what you're saying, because you're inviting people to realize that they can have their own entry and exit into this knowledge, and that it's on a continuum. And so, the only way for us to learn is through dialogue and through listening to different views and perspectives. When I was writing the piece on whiteness, I'm not saying that any particular person literally is a cancer, like you or me or half of Annie or or anything like that. It's just that, I think it's human nature that humans throughout history, throughout the entire world, there's civilizations that take over other civilizations, that's just a fact. But the way in which it has been done, simultaneously annihilating people's cultures to the point where they can't ever get it back. Once you're introduced to Christianity, the English language, plastic, a cell phone, you're done. You know what I'm saying? Once you've had that, once you've had those entries, you can say, no, I don't want to do it. But there's something else that's happened. Not necessarily saying that that's a cancer either. But at the end of the day, the whole notion, there've been tons of scholars talking about white privilege. And what they basically say is that when white privilege is around, it doesn't allow white people to be who they are either. So by deconstructing this whole notion of whiteness and examining what it is and how it works, we will then actually be liberating everybody. The Christians, the Jews, the Muslims, the Hindus, every religion, every race, everything, because it is so narrow in its scope and narrow in its goals of perpetuating itself. Like you said, it just goes on and on with you get married, you have 3 children, you get a white picket fence. Those children go to an elite college and they get married. And, that's just the way it perpetuates itself, and it doesn't allow for anything else to happen. So it's a good thing, because it's the way the world is working anyway. We're becoming multinational, and we're spanning out. So you might as well allow these people to be who they are. And then again, when people are allowed to be who they are, the dialogue becomes much more rich. And so you as a white person, me as a black person, a Dominican person, we'll all be able to share in this new liberated sense of who we are. And then we can bring it back to here at Bard. That's the goal. The start is to start it here.
Sorry, I haven't tried it just sitting like for a second. You want to get on and read this? No, I'm still holding on though. Okay. Lean back. Well, it's kind of got this also actually better to lean back. When I was first envisioning it, that is totally bad.
Part of what I'm interested in doing with this is, like, in my mind, it's connected to decolonization. Based on everything we've done in the class, like we've ended up with this sense of an aggressive kind of settling that is constantly re-articulating itself. Like, its whiteness continually obsessing over passing as white, in ways that are very active here and easy to see, easier than any place I've ever lived in America. More overt, more explicit, self-parodying, like this Hudson Valley Vernacular Architecture Association,
Yes.
where they literally talk about, in one passage, a woman fights off the Indians in this house, and then the house is preserved. She fights the Indians off. She saves the house. Then, now 200 years later, land developers are now taking the house, and in this Hudson Valley Vernacular Architecture narrative, the author concludes the land developers have succeeded where the Indians failed. So they're the same thing, land developers and Indians. And there are constantly references.
The property is more.
Right. There are constantly these references throughout this website to Indians as hostile. You know, it really is. I've actually done some research into the Afrikaner culture and the way that they describe themselves in this whole notion of the lager, which is this word that means when you circle the wagons together and you keep out in that case, the black people, because they were going to attack you. And the kind of mentality that develops, which is a mentality of like virtue, like a notion of virtue, a notion of being a sacredness in your space. And so that's happened here through the metaphors of the Hudson River School, which, you know, the Hudson River School says, this is the new Eden. You know, here we are, like, in this beautiful landscape. It's empty. You know, there are no little black gay male couples from Africa stumbling out into the landscape a la Tracy Rose. But, you know, it gives you this place. So I guess, in a way, I feel like that's the complexity of it, is that the adversarial nature of the aestheticization of this landscape and of the racialization, which is invisible. And that's what struck me as amazing being here at Bard. Nobody even notices it. Like, I remember when I was at Wellesley, we used to sort of engage to some extent with the sort of Boston history, and definitely with the history of Wellesley and the fact that we knew which dorm had been the financial aid dorm. You know, I refused to do work study when I was there because I didn't like the fact that the work study students did the dishes for these girls who would come down to breakfast literally in full formal wear. Whereas here at Bard, everyone's in like jeans, you know, and we're all like pretending to be poor.
Right.
But, you know, so it seems like there's more denial here. You know, and then in this sort of like multicultural liberal arts college fantasy, everyone's completely satisfied and happy in their own little corner. And all the dots kind of connect, and, you know, everybody kind of matches up with their own kind, and then, you know, there's no conflict, and everything's great. And so everything that's like slippery and dangerous and contradictory is just kind of left out. Maybe some student will do a project at some point where some aspect of this project gets turned back onto the landscape in the way that people have done with, you know, all these other locations. Because I feel like people haven't thought of this as material. I mean, if you look at the way that the average Bard dweller views the Bard surrounding area, it's like, you know, yeah, I can't wait to get to the city. Or like, you know, people are unfamiliar with like even the most like minimal details of the roads or the buildings or and that's why I think it's interesting that Bard at the same time is so rooted in this history and this landscape. Like, there's actually a book, A History of Bard by this guy Remer Klein, that I read, and it's
I read part of that actually.
Yeah, yeah. I sometimes read parts of it to students who come in my class or in my office because it's hysterical because there are all these references to like how we got Blythewood and how there was this contested weird relationship between the Bard students and the people that owned Blythewood. But it's also really obvious that this was at a time when all the Bard students were white. And I think it goes back to the all-male time of Bard. And sometimes they would still sort of misbehave and like there would be vexed relations between the college and Blythewood. And then at a certain point, Blythewood was just given to Bard, you know, and then it becomes like sort of annexed and it's part of the Bard Pastoral. So we're totally cozied into this whole scene. But, you know, in a way, it's weird. I mean, and this is kind of very Bard. In a way, it is like the rich kid that doesn't want to know where his parents' money comes from. And maybe that, you know, maybe that is the essence of what this place is about in some way, partly at least. You know, kind of but it's partly through shame, partly through denial, partly through apathy, boredom. Like, cause what is the Hudson River School aesthetic to a hipster? It's the most unhip thing imaginable. I think it is kind of like interesting to think about how the whiteness of this landscape strikes people, because I know that when I first came here, it just struck me as like something, the landscape and the beauty and the sort of like the pastoral nature. I kept saying over and over again when I first came here, wow, I'm in a Hudson River landscape. You know, it's like when I go to France, I love the French countryside, and I love to go to different places in France and say to myself, wow, you know, like I'm in the painting, and like it hasn't changed. You know, all this rhetoric that now in this class has become like so loaded and so charged in really kind of complicated ways, because, you know, we read this this piece about Montgomery Place, which is close to here, like 5 minutes away, and it's produced by the HRH, like the Hudson River Heritage Society, which, you know, and that word heritage, I think is it's a bit of a disturbing word, because it has sort of implications of like there's a sort of correct kind of heritage and ancestry that they're promoting. And as I was saying to someone today, like Dutchess County is, I think, something like 15% or 20% Italian, but there's nothing about that. And a lot of them have been here since the 19th century. There's nothing even about Catholics or Jews. I mean, we're talking, this is like not just white, but Anglo-Protestant, Northern European, not even Southern European. There are no Slavs, there are no, you know, there's a very particular, like, sort of history that is focused on in all of the local historical societies, and on the websites of towns like Red Hook and Rhinebeck. And if you read the local paper in Rhinebeck, they actually will talk about sort of the families who've been here for a long time constantly in the newspaper, and their stories and their sort of genealogies. We went to the Red Hook antique store, and it was me, Kane, Sienna, and Dachi, and Nick, you were there too. We came into the Red Hook antique store, and we asked to look at their Black Americana collection. And when we first walked in, like, I guess like Shauna was the only white person, and Sienna's like 6'2", and like I'm obviously like, you know, kind of scary, right? So these ladies in the antique store were literally like, just that thing where people are kind of like they're thinking like, do I go call the police right now, or like, do we just fall to the ground, or do we, you know, they had that, they were doing that kind of body movement. And then I could have put them at ease right away by saying, hi, you know, I'm a professor at Bard, like these are visiting artists, but I didn't. First we were just like, we like to see the Black Americana, and then like, and it's all, you guys will see these images. And they were kind of nervous, like, to even show us these images, which will be really understandable to you once you look at them. And then we're kind of like pawing through them. Then we noticed that as we go further into the store is full of like racist dolls, figures, and I've never seen anything like it in my life. Like I'm obsessed with antique stores, and I'm always looking, usually for this racist stuff, because I'm fascinated by it. And usually you can't find it, because people are obsessed with it and people collect it, and also because it's either that or people are freaked out by it. And here in Red Hook, what was interesting is a lot of these postcards had been sent back and forth from the South, the upstate New York. Like, they're postcards that people actually, had used and everything, and they're... I had actually never seen anything like it, even in all the different, like, racist postcards I'd seen. I'd never seen anything like some of these.
I think landscape also allows you to kind of forget the human involvement. Like, when I look at especially the less sculptured but still kind of sculptured grounds of an estate, I forget the people who are involved and kind of allow myself to think about the nature of it. And with problematic properties like plantations or estates up here, it's one of those points where I guess I don't feel guilty looking at the grounds and thinking about how gorgeous it is. I feel really awkward. I'm from South Carolina in Charleston, so I feel really awkward within plantation houses. Like, I had used to go on tours because our schools would take us to go witness the history of South Carolina, and there's a distinct awareness and kind of education, and up here I feel like a lot of that is even more swept underneath because I'm in the north now, and so it's got a different history that feels like a lot of people feel like it's much less tainted. And the grounds here are just so pretty, and you don't think about all of the people. Like, there's this intense distancing that when you don't see the evidence, the like sort of concrete evidence of people, you are able to like not think about it. And so we've distanced the labor that went into creating these settings and these images we've like distanced ourselves out so that we're no longer a part of this picturesque equation, and like what we do, like the labor that went into it, or like the people who appreciate it, or the people who are oppressed by it, like you don't think of it when you look out across the Hudson River, like what went into raising all of that land to make this open field.